My name's Alex, and you're watching Alex Builds Capital. Recently, I watched a long-form interview with former President Donald Trump, and I want to share some of the main points he discussed, particularly around the economy, inflation, small businesses, leadership, and long-term decision-making. I want to be very clear from the start that I'm not claiming any personal involvement in that interview. I watched it like everyone else, and what I'm doing here is breaking down what was said so you can better understand the ideas and think through them on your own. One of the first things that stood out to me while watching the interview was how strongly he framed inflation as a real-life issue rather than an abstract economic concept. He spoke about inflation as something people experience daily, not something that only exists in charts or government reports. In his view, inflation shows up when families feel like they're doing everything right, but still falling behind financially. He talked about how inflation slowly reduces purchasing power. Even when wages go up, if prices rise faster, people don't actually feel better off. According to him, that gap between income and expenses is what creates frustration, anxiety, and uncertainty for households and business owners alike. A major part of his explanation focused on energy. He repeatedly emphasized that energy is not just one sector of the economy, but something that influences nearly everything else. He explained that when energy prices rise, transportation costs rise. When transportation costs rise, the cost of moving goods increases. Eventually, those increased costs reach consumers in the form of higher prices for food, housing, and everyday essentials. He described energy as a foundational input. In his view, when that input becomes expensive, it creates pressure across multiple layers of the economy at the same time. Businesses face higher operating costs, which forces difficult decisions. They either raise prices, reduce hiring, or delay growth. Each of those outcomes, according to him, negatively affects consumers. He also connected energy costs to inflation in a broader sense. He argued that lowering energy costs can have a ripple effect that helps stabilize prices across many sectors, rather than trying to manage inflation through isolated controls. His belief was that when energy becomes more affordable and predictable, it creates breathing room for businesses and households. Another key topic in the interview was interest rates. He talked about how inflation and interest rates are closely linked. According to him, when inflation remains high, interest rates tend to stay elevated as well. High interest rates make borrowing more expensive, which affects people trying to buy homes, finance education, or start businesses. He explained that high interest rates don't just slow spending, they slow opportunity. When borrowing becomes expensive, people delay major decisions. Entrepreneurs hesitate to launch new ventures. Existing businesses hold back on expansion. In his view, this slows down economic momentum and makes recovery more difficult. He framed inflation control as a necessary step toward bringing interest rates down over time. According to him, when inflation pressure eases, it becomes easier for borrowing costs to come down naturally, which can help stimulate long-term growth rather than short-term spikes. As the conversation continued, a significant amount of time was spent discussing small businesses. He emphasized that small businesses are the backbone of the economy and the primary source of job creation. He argued that governments don't directly create most jobs. Instead, job creation comes from individuals who take risks, start businesses, and hire people. He expressed frustration with the idea that political leaders often take credit for job creation while overlooking the role of entrepreneurs and small business owners. In his view, when small businesses succeed, communities benefit. When small businesses struggle, the effects ripple outward quickly. He talked about regulation and taxation in the context of small businesses. According to him, excessive regulation and high taxes can restrict growth and innovation. When business owners are uncertain about rules or overwhelmed by compliance costs, they become more cautious. That caution, he argued, reduces hiring and investment. In his view, when small businesses are given room to operate, they often reinvest their earnings rather than simply holding on to profits. That reinvestment can take many forms, including hiring more employees, raising wages, expanding operations, or investing in better tools and training. In his view, this kind of reinvestment strengthens both the local and national economy. Taxes were another major part of the discussion. He shared his belief that tax policy has a direct influence on economic behavior. His argument was that when businesses are taxed less, they often become more active rather than less responsible. In his view, lower taxes can encourage expansion, hiring, and productivity. He referenced past periods where tax reductions were followed by increased economic activity. His point was not that taxes alone solve economic problems, but that incentives matter. When incentives reward growth and investment, businesses tend to respond in ways that generate broader economic benefits. Manufacturing was also discussed at length. He talked about how many industries moved production overseas over time, often to reduce costs. While that approach may lower prices in the short term, he argued that it creates long-term weaknesses. In his view, when manufacturing leaves, jobs leave, skills leave, and communities lose stability. He explained that domestic manufacturing provides more than employment. It builds technical skills, supports supply chains, and strengthens economic resilience. In his view, relying too heavily on foreign production creates vulnerabilities that become obvious during global disruptions. Trade and tariffs came up as part of this discussion. He described tariffs as a tool that can be either helpful or harmful, depending on how they're used. He acknowledged that tariffs can increase costs if applied broadly without strategy. However, he argued that targeted tariffs can protect domestic industries from unfair competition, particularly when foreign producers sell goods at artificially low prices. According to him, fair competition requires fair rules. When companies operate under very different standards, subsidies, or labor conditions, domestic businesses might struggle to compete. He framed tariffs as one way to address those imbalances when used carefully. As I continued watching the interview, I noticed that he consistently returned to the idea of long-term thinking. He emphasized that economic decisions rarely show immediate results. Policies around energy, taxes, and regulation take time to work through the system. Judging them solely on short-term outcomes, he argued, can lead to flawed conclusions. He also talked about uncertainty and its impact on behavior. When businesses don't know what rules will look like in the future, they hesitate. They delay hiring, expansion, and investment. In his view, that hesitation slows growth, even when opportunities exist. Confidence was another recurring theme. He spoke about confidence as an invisible but powerful economic force. When consumers feel confident, they spend more freely. When businesses feel confident, they invest. When investors feel confident, capital moves more easily. In his view, confidence can accelerate growth, but it can also disappear quickly if trust is lost. He explained that confidence isn't created through words alone. It comes from consistent actions and predictable policies. When people understand what to expect, they're more willing to plan for the future. This is where the conversation began shifting toward leadership more broadly. He spoke of leadership as the ability to make decisions in uncertain conditions while remaining focused on long-term goals. According to him, effective leaders accept that criticism is inevitable, and trying to satisfy everyone usually results in inaction. He emphasized resilience as a key leadership trait. Setbacks, resistance, and failure are part of the process, but persistence determines outcomes. In his view, leaders who can absorb pressure without losing direction are more likely to achieve lasting results. At this point in the interview, the discussion moved beyond specific policies and into mindset. He talked about discipline, work ethic, and personal responsibility. He shared the belief that small daily habits compound over time and shape long-term outcomes. He emphasized that focus is increasingly difficult in a world filled with distractions. According to him,
that people who learn to manage their time and attention effectively gain a significant advantage in both business and life. As I reached this point in the interview, what stood out most was how interconnected everything was. Inflation, energy, interest rates, business growth, wages, confidence, and leadership were all part of the same system rather than isolated issues.
The focus shifted more toward government spending and how it affects inflation and long-term economic stability. He argued that spending, when disconnected from productivity, can create inflationary pressure. According to him, injecting large amounts of money into the system without increasing the production of goods and services naturally leads to higher prices. He explained that not all spending is equal. In his view, spending that improves infrastructure, productivity, or national capability can strengthen an economy over time, while spending that only fuels short-term consumption can weaken purchasing power. He stressed that discipline matters, especially when decisions affect future generations. He also spoke about debt and how rising debt levels can limit flexibility. According to him, when governments accumulate excessive debt, they reduce their ability to respond to future crises. He framed responsible spending as an issue of trust, saying that when people feel resources are being wasted, confidence in institutions declines. Labor and wages became another important part of the discussion. He acknowledged that many workers feel wages have not kept up with the cost of living. His view was that sustainable wage growth comes primarily from productivity growth rather than mandates. He argued that when businesses become more efficient and profitable, they are better positioned to raise wages without passing costs directly to consumers. He connected this idea back to operating costs. When businesses face lower energy costs, stable regulations, and predictable taxes, they have more flexibility. According to him, that flexibility can be used to invest in employees, improve compensation, and create more stable jobs. Education and workforce skills also came up. He talked about the importance of aligning education with real economic needs. According to him, societies function best when people are encouraged to pursue paths that match their abilities and interests, including technical and vocational fields. He expressed concern that certain essential skills are undervalued, even though they are critical to economic stability. He argued that strong economies need a wide range of skills, not just academic credentials. In his view, encouraging practical skills and trades helps build a more balanced and resilient workforce. This, he said, reduces dependency on external labor and strengthens domestic capability. As the conversation moved forward, leadership culture became a central theme. He spoke about how organizations function best when leadership promotes accountability and clarity. According to him, people perform better when expectations are clear and when effort is recognized. He talked about promoting people from within organizations whenever possible. In his view, internal promotion creates loyalty, continuity, and a deeper understanding of organizational values. People who grow inside an organization tend to care more about long-term outcomes rather than short-term wins. Work ethic came up repeatedly. He shared the belief that success is strongly tied to consistency and discipline. According to him, talent matters, but effort and persistence matter more over time. He emphasized that people who are willing to show up consistently and improve gradually often outperform those who rely only on raw ability. He also discussed focus and distraction. He said modern environments make it easy to lose focus and that controlling attention is becoming a major advantage. According to him, people who manage their time deliberately are more likely to succeed in business and leadership roles. As I continued watching the interview, one thing that stood out was how often he returned to the idea of mindset. Policies and systems matter, but mindset influences how people respond to those systems. Confidence, discipline, and responsibility shape outcomes just as much as formal rules. He spoke about leadership under pressure and how decision-making rarely happens in perfect conditions. According to him, leaders must make choices without complete information and accept that criticism is unavoidable. He argued that avoiding decisions often causes more harm than making imperfect ones. Resilience was another recurring idea. He described setbacks as part of progress rather than signs of failure. In his view, long-term success depends on the ability to continue moving forward despite resistance, criticism, or temporary losses. Toward the later part of the interview, he reflected on how interconnected economic systems really are. Energy affects costs. Costs affect prices. Prices affect wages. Wages affect confidence. Confidence affects investment. Investment affects growth. According to him, pulling one lever without understanding the others can create unintended consequences. What I found most valuable in watching this interview was not any single claim, but the framework he used to connect ideas. Whether someone agrees or disagrees with his conclusions, understanding how influential figures think about systems helps us become more informed and critical thinkers. My purpose in sharing this continuation is the same as before. I'm not here to convince you or promote anyone. I'm here to help you understand what was said, why it was said, and how these ideas fit into broader conversations about money, leadership, and long-term planning. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you taking the time to engage with long-form content. If this breakdown helped you see the interview more clearly, take a moment to like this video. It helps more than most people realize. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below with what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, or what you think deserves more discussion. And if you want more calm, honest, long-form conversations about economics, leadership, and building long-term stability, make sure you subscribe to Alex Builds Capital. I'm Alex, and this is Alex Builds Capital.